Today, we welcome to the Fangled Cast Jeff Hyde from Ideas in Focus. Jeff and I have done several projects together over the years, and as I promised, I always try to bring just extraordinary people that have great experience and background to discuss many of the topics that matter to how we grow our businesses and truly understand how we build strategic marketing long before we jump to the tool bin of all of those tactical tools that can help us build our strategy. So welcome to the show today, Jeff. I'll give you just a couple minutes to tell us about Ideas in Focus.
Well, thanks, Andrew. I'm looking forward to meeting that extraordinary person. Oh, wait, you're talking about me now. So, thank you for that great introduction. As you said, we've had the pleasure to work together on a couple different projects with me at Ideas in Focus. And Ideas in Focus, we started back in 2003, and we're really a voice of the customer advisory firm. And at the heart of it, what that means is that we help our customers uncover insights about their customers so that they can learn what makes them tick. What are the things that we can use to understand who they are, what they care about, their attitudes, their behaviors. Demographics can be a part of that, but it's really more about the head and the heart. And we use that information to help our customers and clients develop brands, develop new products, inform the design of marketing and strategies and different things like that. Our work crosses really all different categories. So we work with B2B, B2C, nonprofit, government. Really anybody that has a customer can use our help.
And it's an interesting concept because a lot of times people don't recognize, and it's typically the first question we ask when we're doing a consult is, who's your customer? But what a lot of people don't recognize, and the reason we bring Ideas in Focus to the table often, is because of your expertise and really being able to dig into it. But the customer, for example, may be a company. For example, an accounting firm is dealing with a customer that's needing accounting, but you may be producing a product that gets sold through many channels. So there's multiple steps along the way. And I can recall an issue where people were selling to a distributor and considering that to be their customer, when the reality is the customer is who the distributor is selling to. So really understanding that has led to some really interesting insight in using your skills with projects in the past. Today, what I really want to have a conversation about is sort of the buzzword of the day, which is customer avatar, which for us, until somebody decided to change the name, was customer personas. And I'm hoping that you can share with us to begin what that actually means in terms of who the customer is and what is a persona.
Sure. Well, and I think just touching on what you said too about sort of who is your customer and thinking about those things, our feeling is that, that the landscape has really shifted over the last 20 years, where the power and who controls information and, all those touch points in the, client, customer, manufacturer, seller in that relationship has really shifted, right? 20 years ago, 30 years ago was really the man, in the suitcase, right, who showed up at the door and said, here, let me tell you about what we have. And they controlled all the power and the information and all that. Well, that has really shifted now where, even on an interview, I can show up on LinkedIn and I can look at your information and learn about you and your company and all these different things. So the customer has much more power today in terms of, the information and the access and what they know, whether it comes down to pricing or whether it's just learning about the culture or things like that. So it's made it much more challenging for organizations in terms of, how they're able to go out and sell their products and differentiate themselves to make sure that, what they're doing is, authentic and meaningful and, transparent, right? And making sure that all those different touch points that are in the different channels that they're being consistent across those. So it's a lot more of a challenging environment. So, part of our mission is to make sure that those companies really understand their customer and make sure that they're in all those touch points, that they're providing that information and they're doing that in a meaningful way. And so that's where this idea of the avatar, the persona, has really come in and come to life much more prominently. I mean, people have been doing segmentation strategies for decades, and so talking about the customer and that this is nothing new. But the idea of the persona, and that's what we want to call it really, is a persona. I mean, I think of an avatar as more of having roots in like the digital landscape.
Yes.
And so I like to think, it's persona because I think of myself as a person, and then everything that we want to do, we want to think about, the person and the human being, within that customer or that client or whoever that is.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So, in the nomenclature of personas, we'll call that. What we're trying to do is to come up with a fictional representation of a real person that's going to be based on facts and data. So what does that mean? That it's about what's the story of who that customer is and who that person is, and creating something that if you were that customer and I gave you a copy of the persona that we were developing, that you would look at that, kind of nod your head and say, yeah, this is good, you get me. That's what we're going for here.
Let me ask you, how often do you find a company who thinks that they know the persona of their customer only to discover that there are multiple personas that they have to deal with, different people who are doing business with them or potentially could do business with them that they're not speaking to individually?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, that's a tricky question because, everybody wants to think that they know their customer, right? And at the end of the day, if you're the one that is working with them on a daily basis, whether it's a close one-on-one relationship or a mass relationship, you're the one that has that connection in that relationship. So people think that they know. Oftentimes, as we get into, an initial discussion with a client, we're going to peel away some of those layers and ask some of those questions and really get at what do they know and what don't they know. And oftentimes it comes down to what I would call a culture of risk. And does that company feel that, really knowing their customer is important because it helps mitigate their risk and what they're trying to do and investments they make? Or are they less risk averse, meaning that they're just going to say, hey, we can just wing it. We can just go out there and do whatever and we'll figure it out. And so sometimes that risk is around the culture and philosophy of what they feel, sometimes just the nature of their business and that they can pivot and change and make mistakes or whatever, and it doesn't cost a lot to them. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of that comes down to investments. If you're having to invest millions of dollars in capital equipment because you're thinking of making a new line of cereal or something, there's a lot more risk in that than if you're saying, oh, I want to just try something on social media and see what happens and I can change that or it'll be forgotten, tomorrow.
Yep.
So, to get back to your question, that's often the starting point, and we will go in and try to understand sort of what do they already know, what are they comfortable with, what information, are they using and is available. And then that will lead us sort of down that path of discovery of, actually creating those personas. We would say that there's never just one customer. There's never just one persona that we're targeting. The question really becomes, how do we come up with personas that are both meaningful, meaning that you can take action and use the information that you've created for that persona, but then also useful in the sense that you don't have so many that you can't actually do anything with it. So what's that kind of sweet spot between those two things?
So let me ask you this then. What if we're going to look at a persona within multiple personas that a company may be selling to, what actually makes up the description within a persona? What are the things that you're looking for to determine how you build that fictional character that is a representation of a group of their customers?
Right. So that's a really good question. And I would say foundationally, there's kind of four things, right? So, demographics are always going to be there, but, we sort of look at demographics as just being part of that skeleton of who that persona is. We never really want that to be the most important thing, meaning that I don't want it to be that I'm just selling to you because you're a man or your ethnicity or whatever that is. We want it to get at your attitudes. So that's another foundational pillar. We want to get at your beliefs. So that kind of ties into the attitudes, a little bit. We want to get into your behaviors and understanding, what are the things that you're actually doing as opposed to the things that you might say you're doing or say that you think or you feel on that. So, we're trying to look at those things. And I would say emotional drivers also become part of that. And so you can see how there's a lot. We often think of these as Venn diagrams, right? Where there's
Sure.
like some overlap between attitudes and behaviors and emotions and that. But we want to look at each one of those things a little bit separately, because depending on the category and depending on that person, they may have more or less weight in that. So those are sort of four things that we will always use as a starting point. And then in our business, it's not a black box where we just say, let's plug in all these things and here's the formula and we do it. Again, going back to risk tolerance for the client, we want to talk to them about what's your budget, what's your timing, how are you going to use this? We want to make sure that the investment in this matches sort of what outcomes and things that they're actually going to be doing with it. And so there's a process. Sometimes we'll say, are you a good, better, best client? So a best client means that they are going to want a lot of, secondary research, primary meaning that we're going to do qualitative interviews, focus groups, quantitative, we're going to do surveys, and we're going to pull all that together. In other cases, let's say you're a smaller nonprofit and they don't have a budget to do all that research. We might say, how do we cobble something together that is smaller and directional and still going to be valuable for you, but maybe is not as detailed in that. So those generally are the inputs. We would start off with, what do they already know? What research, what information do they have? What can we find out there from a secondary standpoint that's already in the marketplace? We had a client a few years ago that was a credit union. There's lots of information already out there, as it relates to banking and financial industry. So we sort of built on the shoulders of that work, stood on the shoulders of that. So we weren't starting from scratch. And then we did interviews and focus groups and surveys and that. So those would be a lot of the inputs and sort of process that we would go through in gathering data.
So in examples that you may have from credit union or some of the other ones that I know that you've worked on in the past, where you've seen industries where there are very different personas. For example, there was a project I know you worked on in the furniture industry where the challenge the client came up with was, how do we help our salespeople close? I remember
Right.
this about, and the answer was, it's not about close, it's about treating each persona in a way that will eventually get to a close, because not everybody's buying furniture on the first day. Can you kind of give a little bit of background on the difference in those personas and what they meant to that company?
Right. No, that's a really good example, because that was one that, really opened the eyes up of the management of that organization. And they're a macro regional to national in footprint, furniture company, competing with the likes of like Restoration Hardware or something like that. And, and they came to us and said, we've really never done anything to understand who our customers are and how they buy and what's important to them. And so, in that process, we made a very calculated decision to not look at the entire furniture shopping industry, but to really just focus on their customers, right? And so who are the people that were coming in the door? Let's know them first before we start understanding all the prospects and all the people that are out there that may shop at this company, but we don't know right now, and we're not necessarily targeting them. It was about understanding who these folks are. So we went through a process, and we interviewed the store managers. We talked to people who had purchased furniture, from the store. We did focus groups in 5 different markets. We did surveys of their customers. We did shop-alongs where we actually walked with people pretending you were shopping, in their store and some of the competitors' furniture stores. And, we used all this different information to come up with that story of, how does that person shop? What are they trying to accomplish? What's important to them in that? And it was really fascinating because, first of all, we learned that how they were selling was completely wrong. And it was actually hurting their sales because, as you just mentioned, people don't buy furniture the first time they walk in the store. It's if you say, hey, I got a raise or I bought a house or something changed in my life, triggering me to want to go in and get some new furniture, you generally start out by going online and looking around and seeing the options and what's in your area and that. Then you go in a store and you kind of walk around that store and get a sense of it. And then you're going to go to 5 other stores. And it might be on the 3rd, 4th, or 5th time that you actually visit that store before you actually pull out your credit card. They were incenting their salespeople to sell on the first visit. Yep. So as you can imagine, I'm way, way away from being ready to buy furniture, and you're pressuring me and pushing me into this, and it was turning people off. So that was one thing we learned and one thing we changed. The other thing that we learned was they really had sort of two distinct paths and types of customers. They had people who were looking very aesthetically and people that were looking more functionally. So what we were able to do is to help their sales force, their team on the floor, to ask some questions to be able to understand immediately, what are your goals and objectives here? Are you looking more for something that's going to complete the room and make it feel great and give you this vibe and aesthetic that you want? Or are you looking for something that's going to fit the space and stand up to children and dogs and things like that? Yep. So just right there, you're going to be able to get a sense of, who am I and who is that person, and understand who they were.
There's a key nugget in what you just said that I really hope that people sort of contemplate as they're listening to this, is knowing the personas and understanding all of that is one thing, but then having, as you did with this particular company, a unique strategy to them of, rather than people showing up at the furniture store getting a, hey, how you doing? It's specific probing questions that the sales team can use to understand that persona before they start dealing with the customer. Right. Is it, it goes back to something that I constantly say, and many of the people in our organization say, is that people love to be sold. They hate to be pressured. They hate to be closed. Yeah. So if the people involved in that sales process aren't enjoying it, it's because somebody's not doing their job. Somebody's not doing it right.
Right. And this was an example of how 2 or 3 simple questions could completely change the trajectory of that experience for the shopper, right? So the Brilliant. First question being, have you been here before, right? So if they say yes, then this might be that second or third or fourth visit, and maybe they're primed to buy. If it's their first time, then I'm not going to try to sell this person and pressure them. I'm going to take a different path. The second question being, what are you looking for today? And then trying to understand, are you that more aesthetic person, or are you that more functional person? And then once you've taken them down one path or the other, if I know you're an aesthetic person, we actually had a branch where we would say, okay, which type of aesthetic person are you? And so the goals of within that segment were different. So at the end of the day, we were able to come up with 4 really distinct customer personas for this company that were great, because again, the people working at the furniture company looked at these and it said, wow, these really make sense. I'm looking at these people in a new way, but I feel like this is a familiar, authentic version of who this is. And so not only did that provide great value to their sales team, but it helped their marketing team in terms of catalogs, in terms of marketing promotions, in terms of social media. It helped their product team, because as they were designing new products, they were able to design for specific target audiences, and understanding, the weight and value of those audiences within that. So, the personas give you something really valuable that, if you're willing to use it that way, you can help your sales team, you can help your marketing team, your social team, your product development team. But I think even more importantly than that, you can help your overall company develop a culture around understanding that their customer is a real person, and it is somebody who can, that they should be thinking about in those terms, and not as like our customer.
How were you able to measure the performance of the work that you did moving forward in terms of its impact on sales within the company?
Well, that varies with every relationship. Often our work is very front end in terms of what we're doing, and is providing those inputs that a creative team, design team, marketing team is using. And sometimes we have, we stay involved and we understand the outcomes of that. Other times it's more of a handoff, and we're there for them as needed. But I know in this case that this company 5 years later was still using those personas to drive, marketing, development, sales strategy and things like that. And that they've continued to grow and expand into new markets. So it's, it was a very successful piece of that. And I never like to take credit, I guess, in the sense that a smart business person or a marketing person understands there's so many variables and inputs and things that go into this, and places where something can stumble or fail, right? So you could have the best idea in the world and the best strategy and understanding and all these things, and a poorly executed marketing plan or strategy could make it fail. So we want to be a piece of that puzzle that is part of that overall success. But I never take credit that saying that, we drove, a certain percent or growth in that. I think more often than anything, it's about when those clients come back and want to work with us again in the future, which often happens.
Yeah, I think in this particular case, there were some unsaid challenges that they didn't know that they had, which of course is the most powerful thing, is when you discover the stuff you didn't know that you didn't know, which sounds like a lot of words. But, to me, one of the big challenges in any of these situations, whether it's industrial distribution or a furniture store, up front is how do you get new hires up to speed to be successful in their ability. So one of the true benefits of the personas, especially in that company and others, is instead of trying to figure it out by training people to ask those questions that you created, which I would consider to be powerful probing questions to gain understanding, get someone from zero to successful in their role in sales much faster than having to guess. I think it's fascinating. What, as I'm looking at that this is one example, great example of where a strategy was built based on the personas. And obviously it's not a cookie cutter. Every company has a different method. I'm curious in the digital space or in other applications where the use of these personas was implemented in a different way, just to kind of get a flavor of some of the other versions rather than get stuck in this one model or one conversation that you might be able to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, every client is going to make their own choices in sort of how they're using this and how they're immersing it, and I think the best examples for us are the ones that just say that, again, as a culture of our organization, that we are about voice of the customer, and we're going to know, who these people are and embrace this and embrace them as people, not as, customer X, Y, or Z or some demographic or something. I mean, usually we recommend giving these personas names, right? So, this is Mary or Bob or John or whatever. We want to totally personalize and think about, and we'll have imagery and things like that associated with that. And so I think in the best examples, we did some work in recent years with a specialty chemical distributor, and they went all in on these, right? And so, the design of the personas were not only used to help make decisions about their business and could they take a price increase and do some other things like that, but we used it to help, their sales team, both out in the field as well as the inbound sales team. It informed the development and language in their website. So it's always awesome when we create a persona and we have language in there and different, information about that person, and that actually migrates over to their website where you actually see, very similar examples or even word for word on what we wrote on their website. Same thing with their social media channels in terms of like the dialogue that they're having with their customer on that. But in this one example of the chemical distributor, the really cool thing that they did is that, they have this hallway that all their staff has to walk through to get to their desks when they arrive at work, and then obviously on the way out when they leave. They created wall size printouts of these personas. And wow. So the 4 personas that we made for them, they blew them up on some kind of vinyl sticker, like a fathead kind of thing or whatever. But, these were floor to ceiling. So, 8 or 10 feet high, and each one was probably 4 or 5 feet wide. And so as you walked in every day and as you walked out every day, you walked by the personas and you got to look at them and go, wow, yeah, this is a reminder to me of this is who this person is and what they're all about and what's important to them. And that's why we're here, is to, at the end of the day, help them and help them be successful in what they're trying to do. And that's our role in that. So
there's something really
lots of cool creative ways that happens.
There's something really powerful in that just kind of struck me as you're saying it. And not only does it do that, but it also reminds, as people show up at work and when they go home, they're coming to work because those are the people that they're providing service to. These are the people who make my job possible, and reminds them of how important they are. I think that's brilliant. That's great stuff.
And and that was a fun example because they were willing to make the investment to print that out and go all in on that, right? And so there were a couple things going on there. Normally we would say, hey, you know what, these are great. You're going to print these out and put it on the wall in your office, at your desk or whatever. And it's a great reminder for the marketing, sales people, whatever, the people that, traditionally you would say that are dealing with the customer, right? That are interacting with them in some way, that's part of their job. These guys were signaling something different, right? So it was not just the marketing and sales people that got to see these every day, but it was all the way from the CEO down to, the admin staff, or even the people cleaning the building, or whatever. It was like everybody got to see. So it was signaling to them the importance of who the customer is. And I thought that was really great because you don't often, see that commitment to it.
Yeah, I think there's, and we've been working on this over the years in conversation about how the personas can actually lead to predictive models for future product development, for understanding what may be, like, for example, an industrial distributor, based on the persona, what would be the next product that you might want to suggest based on who they are within the market.
Right.
There's so many things to do with it. And now that people are sort of catching on that this persona thing matters, I've seen lots of companies get stuck. And now we kind of know who these personas are. We think we do, but what do we do with it? And again, like we said, it's not a cookie cutter. Each one needs to go back to a creative team to figure out, how do we benefit from knowing our customer, and how can we help our customers the most based on who they are and what matters to them.
And I think that, in our process, every one of these it's a custom thing, right? So we don't just have this black box where we're like, okay, here's the 50 questions that we ask of every client and their customer and everything, and we put it in and spit it out. Ours is much more custom with that, and it's consultative. And so we're trying to understand, the issues in the business and what's going on with that customer, and figure out, sure, there's certain things that we want to always ask and understand. And again, those sort of pillars we talked about demographics, attitudes, behaviors, emotions, that's always going to be a structure around this. But within each project, there's going to be different questions that we ask. Some of that's going to be based on building the persona. Sometimes it's based on what their objectives are. With the chemical distributor, they were really interested in understanding sort of price elasticity, and would their customers allow them to take a price increase? What did they value? Was it about like, oh, you're all about price, or is it all about service or timing or some other attribute? So that was a very unique component to that project that we wouldn't always have, or maybe wasn't what the furniture client needed, or the credit union client, or something like that. So they always change on that. And then we would always advocate too. It's like, look, on an annual basis, you can go in and freshen these up, right? You could go in and ask some follow-up questions, or survey, your customers again. People, like you said earlier on, people want to be involved. They like to be asked their opinion. You don't want to be intrusive or invasive to them. But, if you say, please give us your feedback, help us out so we can help you, usually your customer will want to participate in that, because they'll see there's a return on investment. A little bit of time on my part can help you serve me better. So that becomes a big part of it. And but not every client wants to do that. And so the furniture company example, that client, they sat on it for 4 years, and it had a shelf life for them, and it worked for them and what they needed, and they didn't freshen it up over that time. And that's okay, as long as they were seeing value in it, that worked for their business model.
Yeah, certainly there has to be a mechanism within these personas to refresh and verify that they're still valid as the market changes and the customer base changes.
Right.
Going forward. In a future podcast, I really want to get into, I don't know if I'll have you back to talk about it if you're interested, or someone else, but really the next step in my opinion to this is then when you look at how your company differentiates from competitors, looking at those differentiators and understanding which ones actually matter based on these brilliant personas that you've done the homework and created, so that you can then work forward on that strategic thing. That'll be a future conversation. So
I think that's a thoughtful way to look at it. And, not just, because at the end of the day, any research you're doing is about the past, right? And so how do we look forward and make sure that what we're doing is thinking about future, changes or trends, and the world's a dynamic place. So how do we make sure also that we're taking into consideration what our competitors are doing or how the economy is changing or technology or any of these other things. And all that is going on. And so at least thinking about that, whether you're acting on it or not, I think is really important.
Yep. We're getting close to running out of time. I'm wondering, Jeff, if there's anything I should have asked you specific to this topic or otherwise that I didn't.
Well, no, I appreciate the time. I mean, this is always fun doing this. Thanks for that opportunity. I guess the one thing I always ask clients or prospective clients to think about is, do you want to know more about your customer, right? And I've never had anyone say no, right? And so then the question is like, what can we do to help you make sure that, you are managing, the risk of your business and understanding, how to make an investment in sort of keeping a finger in the water to understand whether it's hot or cold or not, right? And so that's how we look at it, is that doing research or doing voice of the customer work doesn't always have to be a survey of 1,000 people and spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sometimes voice of the customer is just a one-on-one conversation with one person. And did I learn something? Is there something more? That might not be representative of the whole universe and the world of your customers, but always asking, always listening, having that culture of caring about what they're saying, I think is really valuable and something that I think companies just need to be thinking about and really understanding that in this day and age where the customer has so much information and control and sort of power in the relationship, the more that we can learn and know about them. And also I think understand that, those best relationships are a relationship and they're not transactional, that you're going to have, more success in that. So It's just a philosophy and that I encourage companies, whether they hire us or just do it on their own, that they think about that. And I think that can help them with success.
Yeah, my experience in working with you and your organization is there hasn't been an engagement that hasn't actually helped me be better and more thoughtful in what I do. I'm glad that I'm able to share you with the folks that are watching the podcast. How can one of our audience members find you and learn more about ideas in focus, not and focus, ideas in focus?
Right. Well, I mean, check out our website or, LinkedIn or anything like that. My contact information is on there, and I'm always open to having a call or a conversation to chat with someone about their business. Or, I'm big on the idea of like karma and paying it forward. So even if I can't help you, but I can help connect you with someone else who can, I'm always willing to have those conversations and learn. So check out our website or ideasinfocus.com and or give us a call.
Yeah, that's so important what you just said. I mean, when I think about the group of folks that I use and work with in our organization, one of the things that I ask or that I try to figure out is, do they lead with kindness and service, or are they just in it for the bucks and don't really care? So that's something very important. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for coming on today.
You bet. Thank you, Andrew. It's really fun.
And for those watching, if you enjoyed this, check out more of our podcasts. It'll be posted on our YouTube page, on LinkedIn. I think anywhere else in the world you can find a podcast based on how these things get distributed. We'd love to hear your feedback, and thanks for watching. Brought to you by Fangle Technologies, where we help you convert every person your company touches into a voracious advocate for your brand.